Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the human behavior and personality relevant to the Botham Jean murder case. This is an interesting case for a variety of reasons, including how perceptions, negligence, poor judgment, and aggression can all come together to result in a tragedy. So the basic facts of this case are that Amber Guyger, a Caucasian off-duty police officer, 30 years old at the time, accidentally made entry into the apartment of a 26-year-old African-American accountant named Botham Jean. She shot and killed Mr. Jean, then realized that she was in the wrong apartment. Now, I've looked at a number of reports on this case, and I see that some of the reporters refer to Mr. Jean as Mr. Jean. I'm not really sure how his name is pronounced, so I'm going with Mr. Jean because it seems reasonable based on the number of reporters I've seen pronounce his name that way. So I'm going to go through the detailed timeline, then take a look at the evidence in this case, including evidence related to behavioral and personality characteristics, take a look at the outcome of the trial, and then give my opinion as to what I think should have happened in this case. So starting with the timeline, it's important to keep in mind with this timeline that some of the information comes from Amber Guyger's testimony, and some of her testimony was not corroborated. So the case starts on September 6, 2018. We see that Amber Guyger works a 13.5-hour shift in her job as a Dallas police officer. She comes home to the Southside Flats apartment complex located in Dallas, Texas. She parks her pickup truck on the 4th floor, even though her apartment is located on the 3rd floor. And she walks from the parking garage down the hallway toward the apartment that she believes is hers. During this time, evidently, she was exchanging provocative texts with her partner, with whom she was having an affair. As she approaches the 4th floor apartment, which is directly above her apartment, which again is on the 3rd floor, she puts her key in the door and notices the door is ajar. She also hears shuffling and noises coming from inside of that apartment. She opens the door and steps into the apartment and sees what she describes as a large silhouette. She immediately draws her sidearm, her pistol. The person she's referring to, of course, is Mr. Jean, who is sitting in his own apartment, eating ice cream and watching television. But of course, at this point, Ms. Guyger believes that she is in her own apartment, and she believes that Mr. Jean is an intruder. Allegedly, she yells at Mr. Jean. She says, "Show me your hands." He says to her, "Hey, hey, hey," as he approaches her, evidently speaking so loudly that he drowns out Ms. Guyger's commands. She fires her weapon, and he drops to the ground. Ms. Guyger calls 911 and realizes that she's in the wrong apartment. She attempts to provide aid to Mr. Jean, but she also sends 2 text messages to that partner that she's having an affair with, and she's seen walking back and forth in the hallway talking on the phone. Now, during the 911 call, she says that she believes she was in her own apartment 19 different times. She also notes to the dispatcher that she's going to lose her job as a police officer, meaning Ms. Guyger is going to lose her job. At this time, Mr. Jean was alive but unconscious. He was taken to the hospital and died as a result of the gunshot wound inflicted by Ms. Guyger. 3 days later, September 9, 2018, Ms. Guyger is charged with manslaughter. On September 24th, Ms. Guyger is terminated from the Dallas Police Force. The Dallas Police reported she engaged in adverse conduct during that shooting in which she killed Mr. Jean. November 30th, 2018, she is charged with murder. So there's an important note here when we talk about how the Texas legal system works and how it's different than many other states in the United States. So in Texas, we see the charges of capital murder, murder, manslaughter, and criminally negligent homicide. Only the murder and manslaughter charges are relevant to this case. Murder in Texas is a first-degree felony, which is kind of confusing because of the words first degree, and we see this term in other states, first-degree murder. First-degree murder is not the same thing as murder in Texas. It's not the same thing as the first-degree felony of murder. Murder does require intentional killing in Texas, and it carries a sentence of 5 to 99 years, just like all first-degree felonies. Manslaughter is when a death results from negligence. It's a second-degree felony, and it carries a sentence from 2 to 20 years. So now moving on, we see September 23, 2019. The murder trial starts. On October 1st, the jury finds Ms. Guyger guilty of murder after deliberating for just 6 hours. And a day later, on October 2nd, they sentence her to 10 years in prison after deliberating about her sentence for just 1 hour. So let's take a look at the evidence in this case. So this is an interesting case. It appears that a number of smaller errors place Ms. Guyger in a position where she demonstrated poor judgment, and this led to the death of an innocent man, Mr. Jean. Let's start with her trip to the wrong apartment. We see that Texas Rangers took over this investigation. The lead investigator, Ranger David Armstrong, indicated that he got confused about what floor he was on when he was investigating this case. He indicated that there were no clear signs demonstrating what level you were on, especially talking about levels 3 and 4, which of course are both relevant to this case. Ms. Guyger lived on the 3rd floor, and Mr. Jean lived on the 4th floor. We also see the Texas Rangers interviewed 297 of the 349 residents of that apartment complex. 46 of them indicated that they had walked to the wrong floor and put their key in the door of an apartment they thought was theirs, but of course it wasn't theirs. 38 of these people lived on the 3rd or 4th floors. Ranger Armstrong also testified that he believed no crime was committed, but the judge would not let the jury hear Armstrong's testimony. Then there's this whole idea of the affair that Ms. Guyger was having with her partner on the police force, who of course was married. They claim that the physical component of the relationship ended several months before the night of the shooting, yet they talked on the phone for 16 minutes while Ms. Guyger was driving home. There are also numerous text messages sent between them, and it certainly seems distracting. So at this point, her actually getting to the wrong apartment, this seems like a reasonable mistake, a mistake that many people have made before, but she is somewhat distracted. So here I would say that because she is carrying a firearm, and essentially she's carrying one as a private citizen at this point, not as a police officer because she's off duty. But either way, because she's carrying a firearm, she has a responsibility to be aware of her environment. So next, we're going to move to her approach of Mr. Jean's apartment door, right? He has a doormat that is distinctive in front of his apartment. She didn't notice that. And there are a number of other indicators she also missed in terms of what floor she was on. She puts her key in the door and realizes the door is slightly ajar. So it's reasonable for her to believe at this point that somebody might be in the apartment. And of course she believes the apartment belongs to her. This person may have a right to be in this apartment, or they may be there illegally, right? So in terms of how she's thinking about this, they might have a right to be in there, or there might be an intruder in the apartment. This would have been a good opportunity for her to stop and become aware of her surroundings, to think to herself, is there any reason why this door might be ajar? Is anybody supposed to be in this apartment? Can I safely retreat from the situation? Remember, she was not investigating a burglary. She wasn't functioning as a police officer. There was no need for her to be aggressive and try to dominate the situation, which of course we know police officers are trained to do. They're trained to enter into a situation and take control, even if they have to use force. She was not in this position. The best course of action for a private citizen is to take reasonable steps to protect themselves, not to be aggressive, not to go on the offensive. Ms. Guyger had a clear route to safety, any direction but through that apartment door. I think here, in a way, her training as a police officer worked against her. She may have been thinking in terms of getting the bad guy as opposed to maintaining her own safety. If she had taken a moment to think about the situation and retreated, she would have realized that she was on the wrong floor. Mr. Jean would have still been alive. He would not even have known about her mistake, so this was fully preventable. Now, it was noted in the trial that the police training, if she was going to follow the police training, wasn't actually to be aggressive and go into the apartment. This is just the training we kind of see in general. Specifically in her jurisdiction, the training was to retreat and call for help. So really, she had every reason to retreat as a private citizen, or if she was thinking as a police officer. Either way, retreating was the way to go. Now, instead of retreating, of course, we see that Ms. Guyger pushes the door open, sees Mr. Jean, and draws her weapon, escalating the situation to a dangerous level when no escalation was necessary. At this point, it should have been fairly clear to her that she was in the wrong apartment. The apartment was decorated differently than Ms. Guyger's, but nonetheless, she continued to engage Mr. Jean. Now here's where we see some different stories. According to Ms. Guyger, Mr. Jean approached her and again said, "Hey, hey, hey," loudly. But when we look at the trajectory of the bullet that struck Mr. Jean, we see that he was either seated or crouching down when she shot him, not standing up and moving toward her. Also, we see that Ms. Guyger did not see a weapon, and of course we know there was no weapon. Ms. Guyger claimed that she was scared for her life the moment that she shot Mr. Jean. If that was true, if she was truly frightened, why did she enter the apartment when she had other options? Another point here is, if it was dark and all she could see was a large silhouette, how did she know that Mr. Jean wasn't a friend, co-worker, a maintenance worker, someone else who had a right to be in the apartment? She fired at a silhouette, according to her own testimony. Now, there are certainly situations where people who are trying to defend themselves are unable to identify the person they're shooting at. But given that she couldn't identify him, retreating seems like a much better plan. He was unarmed, so retreating would not have put Ms. Guyger in danger. Now, what about the argument that we have to see things from Ms. Guyger's point of view? This is a good argument that the defense made. I think this is reasonable. We should try to see things from her point of view. Remember, she believed that she was entering her own apartment. But even looking at it this way, I think her actions were unreasonable. Ms. Guyger lived alone. It wasn't like she believed that there was an intruder in the apartment who could be hurting one of her family members, friends, roommates, or whoever lived in the apartment with her. She believed she was entering her own apartment, so there were no innocent people that would be in danger. It wasn't like she needed to go in there and rescue somebody. She only needed to protect herself. Again, her actions were simply too aggressive for the situation. Although she had been in her own apartment and there was an intruder in her apartment, the shooting probably would have been ruled as justified. But the negligence that led her to the wrong door simply can't be dismissed. Now, moving to after the shooting, it seems pretty clear that Ms. Guyger should have been providing aid to Mr. Jean, not texting her partner, not walking around in the hallway talking to whoever she was talking to. She also mentions to the 911 dispatcher that she believes she's going to lose her job. So Ms. Guyger thinks she's going to lose her job. Here it seems callous to be thinking about the loss of a job when Mr. Jean was losing his life. Now on to the outcome of the trial. As I mentioned, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of murder. Many people, including me, were surprised by this verdict. And here's why, at least for my part. Ms. Guyger certainly made a lot of mistakes. I believe she was negligent. Her actions cost Mr. Jean his life. He was innocent. However, Ms. Guyger did not go to the apartment in order to kill Mr. Jean. She did not go there with intent, what they call in the law mens rea, a criminal state of mind. The test I use for this is the time traveler example. So imagine if there was a time traveler who could go back to the moment when Ms. Guyger approached the apartment door. And this time traveler, knowing, of course, what we know now, walks up to Ms. Guyger and says, "I thought I saw that you lived on the 3rd floor." Would it be reasonable to believe that Ms. Guyger would shove this time traveler aside and say that she wanted to enter this apartment and shoot whoever was in there? I think it seems more reasonable that she would have realized she was on the wrong floor and she simply would have gone down to the 3rd floor. As for her reactions after the shooting, these situations are so stressful for everyone involved, there's no right way to act. There's nothing that she could have done that could have made her immune from scrutiny. Fault could have been found with any actions that she took. Right? These situations are uncommon, and again, we never know how people are going to react. I think people invest a lot of energy and time in looking at these reactions to situations and kind of use them to construct intent, but I don't think this makes a lot of sense. So I was surprised by the verdict, and I was surprised again by the sentence. The jury had the option to sentence Ms. Guyger from 5 to 99 years, but they were allowed to consider an exception to that, where they could have sentenced her to just 2 years in prison. It's called the sudden passion exception. Even though they convicted her of murder, they decided to give her a sentence toward the low end of that charge, again 10 years. They could have convicted her of manslaughter and still given her that same sentence, or even more. They could have given her 20 years under manslaughter. So it seems a little unusual to go with the higher charge of murder and again still deliver a fairly limited sentence. So now moving on to my opinion, what would I have done if somehow these decisions were up to me? Well, first of all, I wouldn't want them to be up to me. This was certainly a tough case for the jury to consider, and it's really difficult in these situations where it's believed that the person really wasn't trying to kill somebody, but they still do kill somebody, right? It's such a challenging situation for everybody. When weighing all the evidence together and seeing that Ms. Guyger appears to have remorse, appears to have accepted responsibility, I think the conviction of manslaughter would have been reasonable. I know that Ranger Armstrong felt like no crime was committed, but sometimes we just have to take a step back and look at the complete situation. Ms. Guyger entered a man's apartment and shot him to death. A man who was simply eating ice cream and watching television, minding his own business, and who was unarmed. She did not have any right to be in his apartment. Now, in terms of the sentence, her sentence, again, 10 years, I have to agree that this is fair. 10 years is long enough to where this is a real deterrent, so no one else is going to do this, right? People are going to pay attention and try not to be negligent. And it's short enough where, upon her release, she should have plenty of time to work on being a productive citizen and trying to make amends to society for this crime. So I know this is a complex case that has a lot of angles, and there are going to be a variety of opinions on this case. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They're sure to generate a really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of the Botham Jean murder case to be interesting. Thanks for watching.